June, you've got a lot of friends and buddies
I
here,
do, I
and
do.
it's pretty exciting. So,
And across the United States, we're well
all
represented here.
across the United States, and old friends and new friends, which is
Indeed.
fantastic. So, June is going to talk to us this evening about how to choose the right stitch.
Right.
So,
Because if you go wrong on that, that beautiful canvas ends up at the bottom of the tote bag, only to be resurrected when we're desperate. Otherwise, we don't want to work on it. So I'm hoping today that you'll get some courage about really selecting your own stitches. And in a month, I'm going to be the featured teacher again. And at that time, I'm going to talk to you about selecting the right thread. So that combination, I think, will make you very smart about needlepoint. So first thing I'm going to do here is share the screen. Whoops. Let's hope this works. Okay, and we're gonna, from the beginning, oh, let's see. No, we're good with that. Listen, present. Okay, I just have to find my little prompt here. Okay, set up the slideshow from the beginning. Okay, there we go. Hopefully you are seeing a blue patch that says choosing the right stitch. Do you see that? Yeah, everybody's nodding. Good, I feel better already. So making the right decision about the right stitch is very complex because actually in our quiver, we probably have more than 3,000 stitches from which to choose. So how do you weed through all of that and decide what is best for your presentation? So first off, we have to start with you. One of the things I always ask if someone asks me to do a creative consultation for them is what their experience level is. Now, that's not to be prejudiced against a beginner or giving too much credit to the more advanced student, but that does play a part. I've had beginners who are very brave and will take on a really big decorative stitch and do just fine with it. And I've had some advanced stitchers who just get befuddled. So it really is your experience level that will determine if the stitch will be successful. One of the things I would suggest to you too is your own mental state. You know, there are times when we just want to put on our jammies, pour us an adult beverage, and sit there and draw yarn through the holes. We don't want to have to count. We want to have our toesies up. Maybe we'll have soft music on, or maybe a good murder mystery on the TV. But we don't want to have anything too complex to work on. So your own mental state will determine whether or not you'll be successful with that stitch. There are other times, boy, you're cooking on all 5 cylinders or whatever, and you're in the midst of the COVID quarantine and you've got lots of time and you want to, really bang it out on a really difficult stitch. Well, that will also help you to determine what stitch you're going to use in an area. The other thing we need to be seriously considering are deadlines. I've had students come to me in August and September and say, "This Melissa Shirley Christmas stocking, I want to give it to my son-in-law for Christmas." It's like, what? Are you kidding me? You're never going to make that deadline. So if you are under the gun, you got to choose something that will go quickly and not a lot of thread changing and not a lot of complex stitches. And maybe then you'll have good luck meeting your deadline. Unfortunately, with COVID, doing fabrications right now, right, Linda, is pretty tough. So I don't know what the deadline is now for Christmas stockings, but it seems to me it may be August. So again, if you're up against a deadline, well, choose stitches that are going to go quick. Also keep in mind your personal preferences. I have difficulty sometimes doing things on the diagonal. So if you are that way, then avoid those diagonal stitches unless you feel comfortable counting on the diagonal. Or maybe you prefer doing just really simple little tiny stitches to fill in an area. So your own personal preferences should come into this. And if I do a creative consultation for you, I always say you have the first right of refusal. That's why I do my directions only in type pages, not chiseled in marble. You can always change. So you are the most important part of this. Also, along the way here, you bought that canvas because you absolutely had a love affair with it. And we want that love affair to continue to the end and not have that canvas end up at the bottom of the tote bag. The other consideration is the canvas itself. And the first question to ask is, how will it be used? In other words, is it going to be protected or is it going to get some abuse? If that's the case, then we have to be careful about the kind of thread and the kind of stitches that we select. For an example, if you are doing a little patch and it's going to go on a tote bag, and that tote bag is going to be used every day as you travel back and forth to work or back to your home, then that patch has to be stitched in threads that can take that kind of abuse. If it's going to be made into a pillow, is that pillow going to rest in a formal living room where nobody sits except it's there just to be pretty? Or is it going to be in the family room, and when your husband's team makes that touchdown in the last 5 seconds of the game, is he going to grab the pillow and toss it in the air? Oh my goodness. Well, then you better prepare a canvas that is very durable. The stitches to be used should be really sturdy. So how will it be protected? Now, maybe you're going to do a canvas that's going to have museum glass over it and it's going to be put in a room where there's not too much light so it won't fade. In that case, we can pull out all the stops and do very interesting decorative stitches with a myriad of threads. If it's going to be something like you're going to wear, well, then we have to be careful about the stitches we choose and also the threads. Perhaps the best answer for that one might actually be just doing basket weave, horrifying as that sounds. The other thing that sometimes comes up in a class or when I'm working with an individual is that they say, gee, I don't like that plum color. I want to change it. I don't want Santa in plum. I want him red. Well, I have to caution you a little bit. When the artist who painted that canvas selected her palette, she kept in mind that all the colors are going to work well together. So if we move Santa from a burgundy color into a bright red, that's going to affect the rest of the colors that are on that canvas. And if the artist did in fact do plum shades, then the rest of it might be very antique looking. And if you place really bright colors against an antique color, that antique is going to look soiled. So we have to be very cautious if we make the determination to change colors very much. The other problem is if it's a really bold color beneath and you're doing a light color on top, we will see the canvas threads peeking through with the other color. So again, unless you want to paint out everything, you have to kind of honor what the artist has done. And there you can make minor changes, just be aware that you may have to change some other things as well. For an example, if Santa was dressed in that burgundy or plum color and his little elf next to him was done in a deep green that's antique in value, you may have, if you're brightening up Santa, you probably have to brighten up the elf as well. Is the mesh size right for you? Well, some of us have new eyes thanks to a surgeon, but those that don't and are still struggling with stitching, it depends where you're going to stitch. If you are comfortable at home with a great big magnifier and perfect light, then it doesn't matter the size of the mesh. But if you're taking this pretty canvas on a trip where you might end up with poor light, make sure that it is the size of the canvas that you can absolutely see. I often use this as an excuse to have more canvases than I should. There are going to be canvases that I'm going to do with lots of decorative stitches, and then there are going to be canvases that I'm just going to stitch basket weave. And those basket weave guides are usually a 13 mesh, so I can see it even without magnification. The other issue about your canvas, is it real or is it whimsical? If it's a real look to it, then you should try as much as possible to honor that and select stitches that will make this particular item appear real. For an example, if you were doing a pear and it was very classically drawn, you probably wouldn't want decorative stitches. You might want to create it with a shaded effect so it looks real. Now, if it's an artist that has done something that's just crazy pear, then you can do crazy stitches on it. And if it's a big wide area, particularly, that would be kind of fun. So when you look at your canvas, is the artist attempting to portray a real scene? Is there a story there? Honor that story with the stitches that you select. Also, is it a contemporary piece or historical? For an example, if you were doing a Christmas stocking that has the overtones of being a Dickens piece, where you want to make sure that the clothing that the characters wear in that scene are reminiscent of Dickens' era, brocades and satins and velvets. But if it's a goofy one with ducks all over it, then you could be just goofy with your stitches as well. So match the mood of the canvas. If it's historical, try to think about what would the character be wearing in that period and try to mimic it. So you and the canvas are very significant. The other thing is you begin to look at your canvas, say, okay, are there really stitches possible? This happens to be a new canvas from Melissa Shirley out of her Mary Lake Thompson collection. And at first glance, you think, oh, I can do lots of stitches. But look at how those wings and that body of that chicken are painted. Be very challenging to attempt to do a decorative stitch there. The best I could hope for is maybe a chain stitch. Oh my goodness, that's a lot of chaining. Also, the artist has given us a foreground and background, and the background is black. Any stitch you do in black doesn't show off very well, and it's hard on our eyes, so that may be a concern. We also have leaves that are tumbling at the border and leaves behind. Does that mean that the leaf in front can have a decorative stitch? The one behind would just be plainly stitched? Probably so, and you would get the feeling of foreground, middle ground, and background. But again, a really tough canvas for decorative stitches. This might be one to go into the pile for basket weave. The other issue that sometimes comes up is the canvas painterly? That's an odd word, but what that means is the artist is doing things with their paintbrush that we are going to have a very difficult time creating with stitches. Now, this actually looks a bit blurry, and it's not that the picture was blurry. It's actually, that's how Liz paints her canvases. They have that sort of ethereal look to them. Look at that dress that's swooping to the side. There are birds on top of it. So how in the dickens are you going to try to do a decorative stitch around all those interruptions? Painterly canvases are extremely challenging, and one that I would suggest doing only if you have a lot of patience. All those pine needles that you see there are mixed in with bird feathers, and you'd have to make a distinction between that. And again, what the artist can do just with a swoosh of her brush, we would have a very difficult time stitching, even decorative stitches. It can be done, but it's going to take a yeoman's effort. And maybe if in these trying times, we just want to sit there and stitch and create, we don't want to struggle. Now, is it clear? All of a sudden, as you look at this canvas, also from the Mary Lake Thompson collection from Melissa Shirley, look how beautifully these are all outlined and clear. Immediately, I can think of about 5 or 6 stitches to do. That roof line, that brick chimney, the shutters, even the house itself just screams for decorative stitches. And if your mind goes that quick to stitches, it's a good canvas to do it as well. Architectural pieces are particularly wonderful with decorative stitches. So is the artist giving us a real clear picture to work from? If so, your work as a stitch artist is going to be made much, much easier. Here's an example of a decorative piece that has all kinds of gewgaw stitches on it. This was a class that I taught for Linda. It was, again, out of the Melissa Shirley collection. And I would like you to take a closer look here. Whoops, I want to go back. Let's zoom in here so you can see some things. Okay, we're going to start here. You can see that I purposely left the sky area quite a delicate open work canvas because I'm trying as an artist, a stitch artist, to say that we're doing things in the background, in the foreground, and the middle ground. The foreground is going to be much juicier because the middle ground, all these houses and trees, are very abundant with stitches. Let me show you this area because again, zoom in. This is way in front. It's the water portion of this. And I not only embellished it with a really jazzy thread and fish and sequins, I also put in some beads here. Whoops. Okay, let me get this going. Where's my, come on. Well, it's not letting me do it. Let me go back here and just zoom in. We'll talk about it. I think you can see it. You can see these little beads right in front above the blue water. They're very large beads and they are appropriate size because we're right at the lip edge in front. This is the middle, this is the foreground, not the background, so we can be really jazzy with it. And because I did all kinds of florals at the cottages, I have a chance now to do some really interesting things up in front as well. Okay, this is a really good example of being whimsical. Now, this obviously, I don't know about you, but I would never be able to wear these shoes as much as I love them. Even though it might be kind of fun to be invited to that party, huh? So let's zoom in so you can really see here. Look at all the jazzy stuff that occurs on this pretty shoe. So if you looked at a side view of this, it's very lumpy bumpy because it's got all kinds of stuff on it. And again, it's whimsical, so I could do whimsical things here. It was also going to be used as a class and a product for a company called Strictly Christmas. And again, this is quite a jazzy piece. Now, I have to tell you a cute story about the background. I envisioned, because it's often helpful to think about how this piece might be used. If this was a real shoe, what would the girl be like that would wear this? Well, first of all, she has to be young. Secondly, she has to have a darling pedicure because her toes are going to show. But also, I thought maybe she would wear it to a very fancy party, maybe a summer wedding. And so that I decided I was going to do this rather open work background behind, kind of like a garden party. I was thinking, well, let's do kind of a trellis behind, which I did do. And then the company owner of Strictly Christmas, who is opposed to open canvas, said, oh no, June, we can't do open canvas on this one. So I went back, and if you look closely, you can see that every one of those trellis diamonds is filled with an eyelet, because again, the artist or the owner of this canvas wanted it to be filled in more. But again, a story helps you create the right mood for the piece. In this case, who was wearing it? Where was she going? The party shoe. Okay. Now, we're not going to wear this shoe, but you might wear this one. I did not stitch this. This is a attire for the COVID quarantine, isn't it? Just slippers, thank you very much, and cute pajamas, and we're set. I didn't stitch this, but the person that did certainly took a page out of my book, because they too created a lacy background. Again, keeping in mind that if your stitch is too far forward and it's taking away from the main player, it's not appropriate. The focal point here are those fancy little buttons and fur on the toe of this shoe. So again, think in terms, as you look at this as an art piece, and say, who's the most important and how can I emphasize that importance? The color for one, and in this case, the fluffy piece there that sticks right up at us. I wonder if they're really comfortable slippers, though. I don't know. They're darn cute, though. Now, Linda, you're familiar with this goodie, okay? This was our Raymond Crawford piece that we chose to do in November. It's pumpkins from the bird's eye view. And it was my opportunity to introduce many students to the use of overdye threads. Overdye threads sometimes are challenging because what you see is not what you always get. Sometimes in the skein, the thread looks powerful and wonderful, and you'll put it on the canvas and it's kind of poopy because the color isn't just quite right. But in this case, I thought it would be perfect because, again, the theme of this is not real pumpkins. These are whimsical pumpkins, so I could choose goofy stitches. And again, I'm playing with that in and out. You're looking through a frame at those cute pumpkins. So, and those pumpkins are pretty dynamic. So the background way in the back has to be quite gentle so it doesn't distract from the pumpkin itself. And the concern was, how can I make that border even more significant than it is? I don't know if you'll be able to see this really well, but that border was done with a raya thread first. I did a long stitch down the center of each of those leaves. I surrounded the leaf with another overdye and did a big, long, crazy daisy. And if you look really close with those new eyes of yours, you can see that there seems to be beads. Well, those beads are not just flat beads. They're put on a little wire so they stick up like little sticks away from the canvas. So that gave the border more significance against this very dynamic pumpkin piece here. So again, you're playing in and out here. You want that background to stay in the back. You want the pumpkins to be the middle ground, and the border is closest to us and can tolerate some pretty dynamic work. So that was Raymond Crawford. I think, Linda, you still have the canvases available, don't you? Yeah, perfect. Yeah, this was a collaboration. I was in the room when it was shot. No, I was in the room when Raymond and Linda began to talk about it, and I put my 2 cents in. I didn't get very far. Those two went far ahead and just dashed up this cute canvas. This is in honor of the current trunk show. Pippin's trunk show is not surrounding you because you're at your own home, but it's surrounding in Linda's store. Pippin is one of my most favorite artists. She paints the canvas delightfully. And in this case, we are trying to show the use of black, which is a horrifying color to work with on canvas. And if you look closely, it's supposed to be kind of it's the focal point, but we also have a frame that we're dealing with. So, and if you look close, you can see that there are actually good sized pearl beads that surround these dresses. And here's a little hint what happened there. Pippin actually painted all those little bead places with colors. And I wanted to do a rather open, lacy background again. And I knew that if I stitched those beads or stitched those little colors with thread, that thread would be dragged in front and the people could see through the canvas. So instead I said, I'm just going to paint out those little dots, and instead imagine that this woman went to her closet and her pearl beads broke and they're all over the floor. So that's what this image was. That's the story behind this. Black stitches do not show very well, but not too bad on this. And with Linda's help, we jazzed it up with all kinds of things. It was sort of like we were playing Project Runway here, creating this. And the colorful border on the outside draws you right back into the black dresses. Pippin, remember that artist, especially does beautiful work on 13 mesh, so old tired eyes can stitch even when they're too weary for anything else. Now, this is another strictly Christmas one. I mean, this is like a pecan cat, isn't it? I mean, all these pieces are broken apart. Now, I have to tell you, this is not my favorite project. And here's the reason why. Look close and consider all that black and white outlining. Oh my God. Around every piece of this animal is a piece of outline. It took me, and I'm a fast stitcher, it took me more than 3 days just to outline all those parts. Also, it was rather difficult to see what's cat, what's background, what tail. Is that a tail, really? What's that funny thing under his nose? Well, that's a mouse. It took a while to figure that out. So this became a very challenging project to do. However, to its advantage is because it's so wacky doodle, I could also choose some really wacky doodle threads and crazy stitches. That shank that's on the right hand side about the 2 o'clock position, red stitch is a huge stitch, but it works well on this because it's such a big area and such a delightful color. Again, what's background, what's cat? I mean, there's kind of purpley blue with the light blue lines on it. Finally decided that was probably his little mat because it's not cat anymore. It's also up at the top. So again, figuring something out like this, well, if you can't figure it out, just make it work. As Tim Gunn would have said, strictly Christmas. Now, what came first, the cart or the horse? Well, in this case, I gifted Melissa Shirley a copy of my book called Spooky Stitches. And guess what? She took that and she created this piece painted to my stitches. Was that ever a nice change of pace? I was not struggling to do my stitches on her canvas. She was struggling to paint my stitches on her canvas. Anyway, this is one of my favorite pieces. It's small. It's about maybe 8 inches high. And he comes out, of course, early in the fall, so I get to enjoy him. But again, it was really a change of pace to show you, again, a wacky cat, so I could do crazy stitches, and obviously Melissa took it to heart and did it as well. Kind of patchwork. This is a Patty Mann canvas, and I brought it out. I did not stitch it, but I brought it out for you to see. We're going to do a lot with math on our choosing of a stitch shortly. And I have to tell you, if the math kind of blows your mind, you're in this for fun and not for mathematics, well, you can choose stitches that just kind of run on forever. Let me show you what I'm talking about here. Whoops, I want to go back. Previous. Zoom in. Take a little look up here. Look at that scallopy one that's right behind the house. It's just marching along, marching along. And when you bump into something, okay. The stitch that's above near that kind of crazy bird up high, again, marching along until you bump into something. You don't have to count. You just get it set up. The first row is called a tracking row. You put the tracking row in and you keep going until you bump into something. Kind of like a Borgello almost. The green patches under the 3 little birdhouses at about 10 o'clock position there, that's another stitch that when in doubt, those kind of stitches that are not counted out, they just march along. Those are the ones to use. It's the next best thing to just doing basket weave because you don't have to calculate. You're just enjoying the process of stitching. Okay, whoops. So that's Patty Mann. Next. Now this was an interesting project, again, from Strictly Christmas. And I have to show you a couple things first off, okay? The challenge of this, there were several challenges actually. The background was going to be forever, and at the time this was being stitched, it was destined to go to a trade show, and I was under a very tight deadline. And if I were to do that entire blue background in basket weave, as the creator of this canvas would have liked me to do, I'd be an old woman before I finished the background. So I convinced them that we were going to do a stitch called Crazy Rain. It looks like it's ice falling from the sky, appropriate for a canvas that's Snow Factory after all. But the real challenge came in at the top was supposed to be a snow globe. And I thought, how in the heck am I going to give the illusion of a real globe? And I molded over, and then decided, you know what? If I could put a bit of plastic on the top somehow, I could drop in beads into that. And lo and behold, you could shake the canvas and it would look like a snow globe. And that's exactly what I did. Because it was going to be a project that could be stitched across the United States, I had to choose a product that was easily accessible. So staples came to the forefront. I went and bought a box of sheet protectors. It's a sturdy plastic, but it's not so sturdy that I couldn't poke a needle into it. And I could tack it down. I cut the circle out of the plastic, tacked it onto the canvas. Of course, I had to have snow and all that stuff inside stitched in plain basket weave first, tacked that plastic down, left a little opening up at the top, and dumped in the beads. So I think Linda does no longer have this in her shop, but it was really fun because you could see people actually shaking it and making the snow happen. Again, this is a canvas that had its challenges because we have the background, foreground, and middle ground. And if I chose something really light in the background, that worked, and I could be crazier on the Snow Factory itself. Of course, embellishments, look at all those beads and snowflakes and big snowflakes. That just makes it work even better. And fortunately, the artist that created this was okay with the open background on this piece. She just came around to my way of thinking. So snow globe, really fun. Okay, so now let's get down to the nitty gritty here. How in the heck are you going to choose the right decorative stitch? Well, hang on now, because the first thing I'm going to tell you is you got to do some math. We're artists, we don't like math, but hang on. The first thing you need to do is determine in the area that you're going to be working, count the canvas threads across. How many do you have available to create this stitch? Count the threads that it would take to create one of your, let's say you selected that you want to make maybe a mosaic in that area. It's a square, and it's going to, mosaics would really look like it's a little quilted jacket. So a mosaic, as you know, takes 2 canvas threads to work. So I'm going to count how many canvas threads are available on that sweater, and then I'm going to see if my little twosie stitch will fit. And if it does, whoa, I made the right decision. Let's go back through this here for a moment. You are going to get, this is going to be available to you because I sent it to Linda as a PDF. And after our little meetup tonight, Linda will email you this. What I did, just as a little hors d'oeuvre sample here, is I drew for you stitches that cover 2 canvas threads, If you look close, I have canvas or stitches that cover 3 canvas threads, some that cover 4, okay, and on. There's a second page I'll show you in a moment. So if I counted across, let's say I had 120 canvas threads that were available on that little sweater, okay? I have a lot of choices, you'll see in a moment, but I'm determined now, can I use the number 2 without having to say, well, look at that, I sure can. 120 divided by 2, I can do 60 stitches across. So yay, it's a good stitch to choose. I'll do more in a moment, but you can see that the math will be your clue. And if it doesn't work, I have an answer for you for that as well. But here you can see on this page, 2 canvas threads, 3 canvas threads, 4 canvas threads. Of course, I would love you to buy my book, but any canvas stitch book would be of help to you because they often graph it just this way, and you can determine how many canvas threads there are, and then you can count how many you have available and if it works. So here's some bigger guys, 5s, and then when all else fails, girls, remember that Patty Mann canvas that I just showed you, just select something that goes on forever. Brick stitch is a good one. Parisian, huck toweling is a delicate stitch. There are many that just keep marching along, And when you bump into something, you stop, not a problem. Now, let's go back to that example I just gave you, the 120 stitches, canvas threads that you had available. Well, you could choose a 2Z because 2 would give you 60 complete stitches. If I were doing something that was very delicate in the back side of the canvas, farther back, that would be a good stitch to use. 120 divided by a 3Z stitch gives me 40. That would be a good one, kind of 40 and 30 and 24 would be good in the middle area of the canvas. 120 divided by 3, 40. 120 divided by 4, I can still do 4Zs. I'd get 30 of those stitches. They're pretty big though, so it has to be on an important figure in this canvas. Think of it as the focal point. 120 divided by 6, still good. I'm going to only do 20 stitches in that line. 8 still works as well. I can do 15. Now this is really getting chunky monkey, so be careful. Those bigger stitches should be used way at the front end of your canvas. Remember, background, middle ground, foreground. The 8 and the 12 would be good foreground stitches. Does it work? Now, what if it doesn't work? What if you have leftover stitches? You counted across and shit, it turned out to be 122. Okay. Well, not all is lost. In a moment, I'm going to go to my overhead, but if you chose, let's say, a 6 canvas stitch, you can either, 1, plan to do basket weave or continental in the remaining area, or you can divide the stitch in half. And when I get to my overhead camera, I'll show you how that can be done. I would highly recommend that you have a graph paper near you so you can make your mistakes with a pencil and you can erase it rather than try stitching it on your canvas and then have to pull it out. My feeling about compensating is pretty clear. I don't want you to have to compensate a lot, and here's the reason for that. It gives a real amateur appearance to your canvas. You want those stitches to be very relevant to your viewer. They want to say, oh yeah, I know that she's doing an upright cross, rather than what in the heck was she trying to do? So you want to be really clear with your stitch choice, and you want to have to avoid as much compensation as you can. And when you do compensate, do it accurately. One of the things that I often say in my classroom is it takes your brain about 3 or 4 cycles of the stitch to have it memorized. And once it's memorized, then you are able to figure out what half of that stitch would look like. But don't compensate right out of the gate. Try to do the full stitches for a little bit until you recognize the rhythm of the stitch, and then you can compensate more easily. And then again, that if you're ending up with odd numbers all the way around, well, then maybe you should be working on one of those stitches that in the Bargello family particularly, that just go on forever, and then no problem, huh? Consider working a stitch that has a continental as part of its formula. If you think about a mosaic, it's a baby and a mama and a baby. Those babies are really continentals. If the stitch has as its component a continental, compensating doesn't look quite as wicked with that kind of stitch. So think of Scotch stitch, it has a baby stitch. Think of mosaic, it has a baby stitch. And again, that's part of the basic stitch of needlepoint, so it works. Now, here's some sisterly advice for you. And I do a lot of decorative stitches in my work. If you cannot work 3 of the stitches horizontally and 3 vertically, forget it. Don't try jamming it in, because what's going to happen is you're going to have a mishmash of compensation and your work is not going to look very professional. It will look like, what was she trying to do? So again, 3 across and 3 down, you're good to go. If it doesn't work, well, you may have to go back to that basket weave, unfortunately. So the final reminder, be careful what you choose, and always choose something you have fallen in love with, because it's going to be a long affair and you want to stay alert and having fun with your project the whole time and not struggling with math and all the problems of compensating stitches. So I'm going to now take you to my, oops, let me get out of this. Okay, and now I want to take you to my camera here for a second. It's coming on here. There we go. This was the piece that I showed you on the screen a moment ago, and I'm bringing it forward again so you can kind of see that the graphing here will show you that we can't really decide how many canvas threads it's going to take. Is it 2 canvas threads? I have written a book called Secrets, a little promotion here. This brought to you by Secrets. And Secrets, half of the book is really showing you the stitch in person and the graph. I start out with onesies. You can see here how many canvas threads ones. And this takes 2 by 2, 2 up and 2 down, and so on. And what's nice about the book is you get to see the stitch in color. But the little sample I gave you will work just as well. Now, what's going to happen if I was doing, let's say a 4 stitch, and it turned out I had 2 extra canvas threads. Remember when we were counting earlier? Well, I'm going to use my ruler and just say, okay, I have to lose 2 canvas threads here. So if I do that, what does that stitch look like? And you can see, can I create that? I surely can. Do a half a stitch, and that's what it looks like. That's why I'm saying to you, having a piece of graph paper next to your work, you can draft out the stitch that you've been stitching and say, what would it look like if I only had 1 canvas thread? Well, in this cashmere corner, 1 canvas thread turns out to be just a row of continental. And then you are also entitled to a second page on that treat that I'm sending along to you. These are more complex stitches. They're bigger. These guys are, they're the main player. If you did one of these or several of these stitches, you better be putting it on a main player. You don't want a chorus girl to be distracting from the work. And again, you can do halves just by seeing if I only have 2 canvas threads, what's that going to look like? If I have 3 canvas threads, what's that look like? So that's a great way to figure it out on paper before you ever stitch it on the canvas itself. And on that second page, I also gave you the mathematic thing that we talked about earlier. So decorative stitches can be a bit of a challenge, but they can also make your stitching a lot more fun. So I hope you will attempt doing some things on your own. And again, any good book on stitches will show you actually how many canvas threads it takes to accomplish. Choose something that will suit the canvas and more importantly, suit you. So you get that canvas completed, not in the bottom of the tote bag.